As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, bring the puck deep.
Put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of our fellow Americans that celebrate just as hard as most of the Bostonians did this weekend. There were plenty of boards being taken away at the Southie Parade, which was a pretty funny sight to see on Twitter. New voice coming in here to start the episode. Casey Ditzel is cheering on his sister Paige at the Special Olympics out in Italy. So we do miss him greatly for the next couple weeks here, but he's given me the keys to the car and letting me drive the very lovely BMW that is the Fifth Liners podcast. Episode 27 here. I'm joined alongside Jake Swanson. Jake, how are you doing this week?
Doing good, Maddie, and it's good to be back. I mean, a lot of stuff going on for St. Patrick's Day. College hockey is at its all-time high. Loving to see those games. We'll get into it a little bit later, but definitely a lot of stuff going on, and then spring training almost at an end. So baseball season is upon us.
I've got my fantasy baseball draft coming up in about a week and a half. Got a dynasty league with about 15 guys that I want to keep and maybe 10 that I'm allowed to. So a lot of big decisions coming from the Boston Tea Party, reigning champions of the Deke Fantasy Baseball League last season. But like you mentioned, we're going to be talking a little bit of college hockey today, a little bit of a different show. Talked a lot about the trade deadline this past week and not a ton of movement in the NHL the past week. We will touch on a little bit of that at the end of the episode. But we're going to start with the young guys. We're going to look at some of the NHL prospects, looking at Bob McKenzie's list that came out sometime in mid-January, and then get into the college frame and end off with some NHL here. To start off, looking at some of the prospects. So the Sharks were eliminated from playoff contention last night. I know, I'm very disappointed in that. However, it does mean that I get to start looking towards the future and potentially trying to get one of the top picks in the lottery. The Sharks with the best odds right now, followed by Chicago and a plethora of teams that really don't have many playoff hopes this season. But in January, Bob McKenzie, one of the most renowned voices of prospect rankings out of TSN, he released his top 32 back in January. And again, this will probably be updated at least once, two, maybe even three more times prior to the end of the season. So a lot of movement since this list has come out in January, but we wanted to quickly start off and talk about the three players at the top of the draft, similar or not so similar to the past few years where Macklin Celebrini and Connor Bedard were two of the big faces and the renowned number one picks. I think this year is a little bit different in the sense that there's probably two, and I would even argue three guys that are kind of fighting for that top overall spot and a lot of time between now and June to move themselves up the leaderboard here. So we'll start off with those top three guys, looking at defenseman Matthew Schaefer from the Erie Otters. Unfortunately, he was hurt during the World Junior Tournament back in December, but prior to that, he had a really good season in the OHL with 22 points on 7 goals and 15 assists in just 17 games played from the blue line. After that, we've got James Hagens, centerman from Boston College. He's playing as a 17-year-old freshman in the NCAAs this season. A point per game so far, 35 points, 10 goals, 25 assists in 35 games this season. And finally, Michael Misa out of the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL, just lighting up the score sheet night in and night out. 62 games played, and I wanted to start with that because of just the video game numbers that he's putting up this year. 59 goals in those 62 games alongside 67 assists for 126 points. His only downfall is probably a little bit of an undersized, but we've seen so many players time in and time out say that size does not matter in the NHL. Jake, of those three guys, is there one that really stands out to you as the consensus number one?
It's tough to say because, like you said, there's a couple of guys, and those are probably my three. I'd probably throw Porter Martone in there too, but we'll talk about him later. But for me, I think with Schaefer being the only blue liner up there, and honestly not seeing a lot of like top end blue line prospects in the last couple of years, I think that's probably where I'd go, especially with San Jose, where you already have a Will Smith and a Macklin Celebrini. Just thinking positional needs for a lot of these teams, like someone on the blue line to captain that blue line for the next 7, 8, 9 years. I mean, look at what Cale McCarr did after he got to the Colorado Avalanche. I mean, he's been running that blue line basically since he's gotten into the NHL. So if teams are looking for someone that's able to run a power play, able to be that kind of 1A defender that you can throw in any situation, I think that Schaefer's a really good guy to do that. So hopefully he rehabs well from his injury. Like I think that's probably the one caveat that most teams are going to have, just making sure that he's healthy and making sure that it's not a lingering injury for the rest of his years playing pro hockey. So that's where my head is at. I don't know if you concur, if you got another dissenting opinion. I know sometimes we go back and forth on this stuff. So
Yeah, I think each of the guys kind of provides something different, which is pretty unique at the top of the draft. And I think there's a lot of teams up there that kind of aren't just picking BPA. Like you'd mentioned, San Jose, they've got Celebrini and Will Smith up the middle. Do they move Smith to the wing, which he started to play a little bit in his rookie season, and think about taking a centerman? You know, a team like Chicago, they drafted Levshinov so high last season. Are they going to take another guy on the blue line? But for me, I think Schaefer is the consensus number one. It sounds like McKenzie has a lot of sources that agree with that. And I think even with the small sample size, he has looked really good in that sample size. He was extremely dominant in the World Juniors tournament as a draft prospect, which is a U20 tournament. And his games with the Otters, he's just got some unbelievable highlight reel goals. He's also a very sound defenseman. He's got good size. And I think he's, as a defenseman, it's going to hold a little bit more value. We haven't seen a guy go number one in the blue line since Owen Power back in 2021. And I think more than likely, this is going to be the year that we see another blue liner go at the top of the draft. You mentioned a guy, Porter Martin. He comes in at number 4, playing from the Brandon Steelheads. And running down the list here quickly at number 5, Anton Frundell in the Swedish Men's Professional League. Caleb Denoyer, playing in the queue for the Mountain Wildcats, comes in at number 6. Roger McQueen, somebody who we haven't seen also because of injuries, playing for Brandon this season in a limited sample size out of the W. Victor Eklund, brother of Sharks star Wayner William Eklund, also playing on the same team, Djurgårdens out of the Swedish Men's League, comes in at number 8. And then to round out the top 10, we've got Jake O'Brien from the Brantford Bulldogs, which Zach Hyman's family just recently purchased, I want to say a year or two back, out of the OHL. And Jackson Smith out of the Tri-City Americans in the WHL comes in at number 10. Jake, give me a couple of guys that are right around that top 10 range. And there's a couple of names towards, Logan Hensler, Radim Murka, both at 11 and 12 there respectively as well. Give me a couple names of guys that you're looking for some of those teams that are going to be, not a lottery team, but kind of that middle end of the pack in the lottery this season.
yeah, for me, I think Porter Martin towards the top of that. I think a 4 is probably a fair assessment for me from Bob McKenzie's rankings, and I really like his game. A big body, 6'3", 200, a big power forward body, but he's got some offensive skill, and he's flashed that in his junior career. So I'm really excited to see what he can do with that. I mean, throughout his season this year, it's been interesting to see. He's got, 92 points in 54 games. Again, talking about video game numbers. And he's not letting it up just as much as Michael Misa, but still it's over an assist a game at that point, and probably just under like a 0.6, 0.7 goals per game. So it's pretty insane to see that. And then another guy going a little bit outside, you mentioned him just briefly, Logan Hensler, a D-man for Wisconsin. Took a little bit for him to get used to the speed of the NCAA game when he got there. But now into his second season with the Badgers, he's been really showing some really good flashes. And I like what I see. Wisconsin always a threat in the WCHA. And I think with them, I like his ability to defend. He's got really good stick handling, really good stick ability on the defensive end, and he's a guy that's going to get those tips, going to get those deflections in front of the net and make sure that nothing gets to his goaltender. One thing he does need to work on a little bit is his physicality. Seen mentioned where if he's defending someone that's an elite puck handler, it's going to be tough to defend with just the stick. He's got to kind of take the body to him, but I think he can develop that. I mean, that's kind of part of the game as you get older in the game of hockey. I mean, going from high school to juniors to college to pros, like you're going to get that sense of physicality or you're going to get dished out some physicality in return. So I like what I see out of Hensler, and I think he's a really solid like option if the GMs don't want to go with a junior defender, want to see someone who's had some NCAA ice time.
Yeah, I agree with you there that the Woodbury, Minnesota native and Logan Hensler there. I think when I think of his game, it's almost similar to you think of a guy like Brett Pesce, right? Like, and how valuable he is to an NHL team as a shutdown guy on the right side. A lot of the top guys you think of on the right side, whether it be Cal McCarr or Adam Fox, they're all puck moving, power play guys who also obviously have some defensive mindset to their game. But there's not a ton of guys on that right side that are complete shutdown guys. And I do think I agree with you there that Hensler could be one of those guys. But looking at the number one forward out of the European side, Anton Frundell is a guy that I really want to talk about here. Playing in the men's league, and a lot of the stats aren't going to be video game like, but he's doing something as a U18 that we really don't see very often. He's nearly a point per game in the Swedish men's league. He's got 11 goals, 14 assists for 25 points in just 29 games for Djurgårdens. And him playing with Victor Eklund definitely probably helps that. But I think Frundell is one of those guys that a lot of scouts are going to like because he does a lot of the things the right way. He might be the most complete player in this draft. And you think of guys that are number 2 centermen in the NHL and the value that they hold for teams. I think of a guy like Philip Deneau, who for Montreal for years and for LA for a few years now has been just somebody very reliable in the second line that can eat up minutes and play all 3 situations, whether you look at the power play, the penalty kill, or 5-on-5. I think his two-way ability and overall scoring upside is going to give him that high 2C potential. And you might be thinking, right, like, as your number 5th overall pick, is that really the ceiling that you want? I think he does have some low-end 1C upside, but I don't know how star-powered this draft is. I think this is definitely a class that looks a lot more deep than it is with some of the star power at the top that we've seen in the past. Like, I don't think you're going to get a guy like Leo Carlson went and Will Smith and kind of that draft a couple years ago where there were 4 or 5 potential bona fide stars at the top of that draft. I think this is just a much deeper class than it is star powered. And I think Frundell, being one of the more complete players in this draft and getting some experience playing against professionals in Sweden is going to really give him an edge on some of the other prospects in this draft. The other name I had was Roger McQueen. I think he's probably, when I think of prospects, you think of the Josh Allen of the NHL prospect pool, right? Like, all the intangibles are there, right? When you look at Roger McQueen and what he offers, he's got an absolute cannon of a shot, probably the best shot in this draft. Shooting on the right side. He's 6'5", 192. That's a monster on the ice, and he's a fairly good skater. I think he definitely could improve there. The issue is the injuries, right? We've only seen such a small sample size, and even when he was playing, right, like 18 points in 14 games for a WHL player is not anything dramatic. But I think if a team sees the potential there and thinks that they can develop him, for me, I feel like McQueen is going to be a really interesting, polarizing player. I think there's also a ton of teams in that, mid-lottery area that have either really stacked up their prospect pool, and you think of a team like Anaheim and don't really need to take a shot on a player like that, or really don't need to like be safe in a sense and can kind of take a shot on a player like that. Or you think of a team who's in more of a retooling mode, right? Like a Boston Bruins who's going to be in the lottery for the first time in God knows how many years at this point. Why not take a shot on a guy who's got a ton of upside? And at the end of the day, put the puck in the net is the name of the game. And I think Roger McQueen has the potential with that shot to be able to do that much higher than a lot of the different players here. Jake, outside of that top 10 to 12, 15 range, any other guys on your radar that you think has a chance to be moving pretty far up in the next month or so?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think another name that I really like, and one that we've seen again at the NCAA, or not, sorry, not the NCAA, again in the WHL, is Joshua Ravensburgen, the goaltender, number 28 on this list. And kind of a a bona fide NHL franchise mode stud, but I do like what he does in real life as well. I mean, again, 18-year-old, he's 6'5", 192, basically literally the same build that we were just talking about, but in between the pipes now. And I mean, I really like his game. I think he's got a real chance at being a good starting goaltender in the NHL. He just needs a little bit more refinement in his puck skills. And I look at like his numbers this year, and they look pretty good. I mean, in the last 10, he's got a 92 921 save percentage, just about. And in the last 7 games he's played, and I really like what I see. And other thing too is he's a right-handed catch, which you don't see too much anymore in the NHL. So definitely throwing off shooters, which is something not to look down at. So I think with him being the number one goalie in this class, I'm interested to see who's going to be knocking at the door, whether it be someone that's looking for a backup goaltender eventually take over the crease, like maybe a New York Rangers when Shesterkin's ready to hang him up, like at the end of that 8-year deal, and have Ravensburgen just ready to go in the prime of his career. Or if you're looking at someone who's looking for that bona fide number one. So I think with that, there's a lot. And again, he's only 18. That's a lot, like a lot of these junior guys, 17, 18. It's a perfect age to just kind of like look at him and say like, hey, if we've got a guy on a long-term contract, this is almost like the NFL analogy is like you let him sit behind QB1 for a couple of years and let him learn from the best. So I think it would be a really good shot to take, especially if you're later in that first round.
Yeah, I think it could be really interesting to see where these goalies go. Ravensburgen is the number one on Mackenzie's list, and that's all the way down at 28. We've seen goalies go high, even as recently as Yaroslav Askarov going number 11. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, like you mentioned, who's going to stash some of these prospects. And, I like a team like the Rangers. You even think of maybe some of the teams like New Jersey's got Jacob Markstrom locked up for 4 or 5 years, and goaltending's always going to be a question mark as a New Jersey Devils fan, if you are one. So I think that is definitely an interesting name. The one that I watched this past weekend, honestly, that caught my eye was Sasha Boumediene, a defenseman from Boston University, left shot defenseman that had a bit of a sheltered role to start the season. But as the season has progressed, he's gotten a lot more trust from his coaching staff and is starting to play a lot more big minutes. None of the numbers are going to light you off the screen, right? 12 points, 3 goals in 35 games, but he does play a very complete two-way game. And I think he's in a really good situation where Cole Hudson is more than likely going to get some time with the Capitals next season. And if he doesn't, you have Cole Hudson in front of you to be able to learn and develop at Boston University, which has been a really good pipeline for plenty of NHL players. If you walk around their rink, the number of NHL jerseys that are hanging up there is honestly insane. But I think for Boumediene, he makes plays. And it's one of those things that just sounds simple, right? But in big time moments, you got to make big time plays. They had a game this past weekend against the UMass Minutemen where 2-on-1 coming at him, he gets his stick in the way to completely shut down the 2-on-1. And then all of a sudden you see him trailing for a 1-T to put them up 2-1 in that conference quarterfinal. So for me, I think he's an interesting player that could continue to rise, especially if he starts to make a ton of plays in this NCAA tournament coming up, which we will kind of transition right into right now.
One thing I was going to say too is a good point as well is, and I kind of wanted to bring the question up to you, is what do you think about with the now CHL players being able to go to the NCAAs afterwards? Like, do you see a lot of these prospects, like say a Roger McQueen doesn't get healthy in time to report to his next training camp, like does he think about going the NCAA way and like getting some time in there, or will the teams just say, hey, go back to your junior team, or hey, come play in the A?
I think it's going to really be case by case. Like, I think certain players, especially goaltenders, I feel like this is a really dream situation for them, because when they expire at 20 years old, they don't have to go sit in the ECHL for 4 years before they're ready to play, right? They can, play in the OHL for a couple years, maybe until their 18 or 19-year-old season. And then they have 4 years of college eligibility to continue to grow against some of the top prospects and top players who, if you look at the NHL landscape right now, there's probably 10 to 15 guys who are cracking their rosters. So the ability to do that and after the fact that you age out, right? Goalies, to me, you kind of set them like an MLB prospect out of high school. Like you're kind of just waiting 6-7 years at that point. And I think it just allows them to get better competition and see more quality shots earlier in their career. And I think that's going to really help for goaltenders to develop. But I think in terms of a guy like McQueen, right, I think it really is if he feels ready to make that jump. I think the quality of players in Canadian juniors is probably going to go down. I think it's just going to get younger. And I think there's just going to be situationally like a shift in the kind of players that play there. And I do also think there's going to be certain NHL teams who prefer them to be in juniors because it's a lot easier to call them into the NHL if they need it. It's a lot easier to get their 9 games and send them back to juniors where that option really isn't available for a college player. So I think there are pros and cons on both sides there, but I think the big winners there is probably goaltending would be my best guess.
Yeah. And I just think it's interesting because we haven't had this situation before where that college is going to be an option for a lot of these Canadian prospects. So it'll also be interesting as we get into the college hockey, like how much this is going to change the college hockey landscape and how much it's going to elevate the competition coming into the NCAAs.
I think the next 2 to 3 years are going to be exponential growth for college hockey. And like you mentioned before, we are at an all-time high right now. We are in conference championship weekend here. None of the 6 NCAA hockey conferences have named their champion yet. However, we do have one team that has already qualified automatically for the NCAA tournament. We'll get into that in just a second. But first, just looking quickly at the pairwise themselves. Running down the list here, the number 1 team, the Boston College Eagles, consensus number 1 all year. No matter what happens this weekend, they will stay at that number 1 spot. And I'll be getting to go watch them play up in Manchester, New Hampshire for their regional, because that's pretty much the closest location they'll get. So they'll get that first pick there. At number 2, the Michigan State Spartans out of the Big Ten. They are playing in their conference tournament this weekend. Similarly, in the Hockey East, number 3, the Maine Black Bears. Minnesota rounds out the current number 1 seed at the 4 spot with Western Michigan in the 5 spot behind them. A run of Hockey East schools, and we'll hear about a lot more Hockey East schools as we get down this list. But at 6, 7, and 8, you've got Boston University, UConn, and Providence. Ohio State playing against Michigan State for the Big Ten championship this weekend will be in the 9 spot. And Denver rounds out your top 10. UMass, Quinnipiac, Penn State, Michigan State, Arizona State, and Minnesota State Mankato round out the 16. However, with the automatic qualifiers, the bubble kind of lines right around that Michigan spot in the 14 hole. And then the remaining teams that have a chance to get one of those automatic bids with their conference tournament include North Dakota, Cornell, Clarkson, Dartmouth, and Northeastern in that order. Looking at what that conference schedule is going to look like I mentioned before, we do have one team that is automatically qualified, and that will be the Mavericks of Minnesota State Mankato. They play this weekend in the CCHA Championship against St. Thomas. However, St. Thomas made the jump 2 to 3 years ago and is currently not eligible for the NCAA tournament. I believe it's their last year where they're not eligible.
Yep.
But unfortunately, they will not get a chance to make it to the NCAAs this year, meaning that the Mavericks will be getting a spot in the Frozen Frenzy this year. Out of the Big Ten, like I mentioned, Ohio State and Michigan State will be playing for that title game this weekend. In the Hockey East, on Thursday, we've got the 9 seed, Northeastern Huskies, with a huge upset, a team that always just comes around and wins big games. They go and beat Boston College at Conti Forum, and they are playing against Maine. They will play the winner of Boston University and UConn on Friday. The winner of those 2 games over on the 21st at TD Garden, like I had mentioned before. Out of the Atlantic, we will have an automatic qualifier here out in Worcester, Mass. Holy Cross versus Bentley. Our fellow comrade George Bannister rooting very hard for the Crusaders there. Out of the NCHC, we've got Western Michigan playing North Dakota and Denver playing Arizona State with a ton of movement on the line there. You could see potential teams move to the 1 slot. You could see some teams steal a bid. You could see some teams get into the bubble if they win or not. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. And then looking at the ECAC, one that hits home, Dartmouth will be playing against Clarkson, and Cornell will be playing Quinnipiac up in Lake Placid, and those winners will face off with the only team that probably has an at-large bid at stake is probably the Quinnipiac Bobcats, but it's a wide open tournament. Any of those three teams can go in there and steal a bid from one of those teams that are not playing this weekend. But Jake, how are we feeling about Clarkson coming into this weekend?
Ooh, man, that the overtime against Harvard, it was a hard fought series against the Crimson. I mean, Harvard always seems to have Clarkson's number. I mean, I remember when I was broadcasting, it was the record of the number of draft picks on the ice. I think it was 9 at one time. It was kind of insane. So it just goes to show you how much the ECAC has improved since its inception. And I think Dartmouth isn't going to be an easy out for Clarkson. I mean, they've got their former blue chip prospect in oh geez, I'm going to forget his name now. This is bad, but their goaltender. Oh man, this is really going to bug me now. Hold on.
You got to look it up here.
I know.
Thankfully, we live in 2025 now. We've got the laptop screens locked and loaded for forgettable info.
I think it's definitely going to be a good game. Emmett Croteau, that's who it is. Is Montreal Canadiens draft pick. He transferred after 1 year after not getting the starting job. And we brought in Ethan Langenegger instead from Lake Superior State, who's been absolutely stellar. I mean, got ECAC goalie of the year, first team all ECAC. So I'm feeling good about the Golden Knights' chances. But once the other side of the bracket, Cornell, Quinnipiac, that is a death match, and I am really excited to watch that. I mean, Cornell upset, I put in quotes, upset their quarterfinal matchup against Colgate, but them and QPEC always top dogs in the ACAC, and I'm excited to watch that. And in terms of the other ones that I'm going to be watching really closely, NCHC and Denver and Arizona State, I think that's going to be a really fun matchup to watch. And then as well as Ohio State, Michigan State. I mean, living in Cleveland now, everyone's a Buckeyes fan, so it's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top, because I mean, Michigan State has had a really, really good season this year, but Ohio State, I mean, they've been hovering around that like 15-10 mark in the pairwise, so never count them out.
Yeah, and I think they can potentially even move up to a 2 spot depending on how the Hockey East championships go with 3 of those Hockey East teams in front of them if they're able to sneak out a win against Michigan State there. So we've talked about the teams. I think there's a consensus, probably 12 to 13 teams that are locked in there. Looking at the Penn State line is probably the spot where I think it's going to be hard for a team, unless there's multiple bid stealers. If you look at, let's say a Clarkson and a North Dakota and a Northeastern all stealing bid, I think Penn State's probably that 13 line where they feel fairly safe right now. So out of those 13 teams that are, Penn State and up, give me one of your teams that you think is a huge favorite going into it, and then a sleeper team that you're excited to watch.
Yeah, favorite for me, I'd have to say Michigan State, and it was really back and forth between them and Maine for me. And I think the biggest thing with Maine for me is I think a couple of their conference losses I don't feel very confident in going into a tournament here. And Michigan State, their only unranked loss was against Wisconsin in December. And I mean, then they lost to BC, they lost to Notre Dame, they lost to a lot of the top 25 in college hockey. So I really like their chances. They also have a really, really good defense. I mean, they're sitting right at that 2.00 goals against per game. And it's really hard to do when you're in NCAA Division I hockey. So I really like the way their blue line looks and their goaltending. And then they're also got a really solid offense with the Big Ten scoring champ in Isaac Howard. He's got 47 points this year, and I think he's the next closest to him is like 26 or 27 on his team. So he's been really carrying the load offensively, and I think he's going to keep doing that into the tournament. Sleeper. Now, I did miss the part in the pregame notes where you said it was going to be in that 13. So my sleeper for this is going to be Arizona State. I think they've got a really good shot if they make it past Denver. If not, if I had to pivot, I would have to go to Ohio State and stay loyal to my Ohio roots here. And with Arizona State, they're really fun offense to watch. They're top 5 in the country in goals per game. And their defense is always a little bit of a concern, which is where I think Denver's probably got the edge on them this weekend. But For Ohio State, I mean, they've been outstanding the last couple of years. I mean, I remember when I went to watch them and the Ohio State Michigan face off on the lake in First Energy Stadium in the outdoor game. That was one of the best environments I've ever seen. And they've just gotten better this year. I think Ohio State has definitely got a really good shot here to knock off Michigan State in this Big Ten championship. So we'll see what they can do. But I'm excited either way. Whatever this way goes, outside of the Clarkson games, I'm just really excited to watch some college hockey playoffs.
You mentioned big atmospheres. I don't know if you saw the video of Arizona State's campus when they were playing Duluth this past weekend, but an unreal environment at Gila River Arena this year. I really hope that they get an NHL team back there over the next 3 to 4 years, because I think hockey is really growing in the desert. And like Paul Bissonnette always says, like the desert deserves a team there.
Yeah.
For me, I really want to go with my Minnesota pick. I didn't want to go with the bias, but I do think they've got a ton of depth this year and their goaltending has looked really solid. But let's talk about BC, right? They're the consensus #1 team. They haven't been able to put it together. They lose to BU in the Bean Pot. They lost in the quarterfinals of this tournament. I think they're going to have a huge vengeance going into this tournament as like, okay, it's time to put in a second gear. I don't know if we've seen the best of Boston College this year, and they are the best team in college hockey, led by their goaltending. I mean, Jacob Fowler has looked unbelievable this season, and they've got so much firepower up front and a lot of veteran presence on the blue line. And I think that's two huge key factors there, where you're able to get big time plays from Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault almost on command, compared to a defense that's going to be able to lock it down and make sure that Fowler's only seeing some of the easier shots, which even if he has seen some tougher shots, like he's been able to make plays when they need it. So if I had to pick a favorite that wasn't my Gophers, I'm going to go with Boston College there. And for my sleeper, I try and be topical every time I wear some gear on here, but let's talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions hockey program. They have been one of, if not the best teams in college hockey since the break. They have 4 losses, and I believe they've all come to conference opponents that are ranked inside the top 15 pairwise. They have 1 loss to Minnesota, 1 to Michigan State, 1 to Michigan, and 1 to Ohio State. And that Ohio State loss came in overtime in that Big Ten semifinals this past weekend. They got one of the top scorers in the NHL, or in college hockey, in Aiden Fink, a Nashville prospect who's looked really good this year. And one of the regionals is in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So no matter what team they get paired with, no matter what 1 seed gets them, they're going to have a home game. So I think the energy in Penn State of a whiteout is already electric enough. Imagine that during a playoff game. I think Penn State has a real good case to be a 4 seed, or more than likely they're going to fall on the 4 line. They could be one of the first 4 seeds in a long time that we see end up making the Frozen Four, just because of that home ice advantage combined with just they're a hot team at the right time. And that's kind of what it takes when it comes to the Frozen Four. Like you got to get hot and you got to be playing good hockey at the right time. And Penn State's been doing that. Another team that's been doing that as well is the UMass Minutemen. I think they were somewhere on the 20 line for most of the season. And then since the break, they lost a game to BC, they lost a game to Maine, and they lost a game to BU. And that's pretty much it. And they, 3 losses since January 18th. They lost in overtime to BU. Very similar story to Penn State that we just talked about. Lost to BU in overtime in their conference quarterfinals this past weekend. But again, another team that's hot at the right time. They've got a star in Cole O'Hara who's looked really good all season. And they've got a 6'7" goaltender in Michael Harabel, by the way. So I think both of those teams at the 4 line and potentially the 3 line for UMass is going to be a problem for some of those top seeds. But we talk about the big time teams. Let's talk about the big time players. This Wednesday, March 19th, the top 10 will be released for the Hobey Baker finalists. Voting occurred over the last month for some of the top players in college hockey this season. And similar to the NHL draft, not a consensus #1 guy that we're looking at. I think last year it was pretty obvious Celebrini was going to be that guy. I think there were some arguments to be made about Will Smith and maybe even Cutter Gauthier, but I think most people were on the sense of Macklin Celebrini being that guy. This year, I think there's a ton of guys to talk about. And let me list off pretty much some of the top scorers in college hockey this season, as well as a couple goaltenders that more than likely will at least get some votes. And I think at least one of them will probably be in that top 10. Typically, at least one goalie is. But let's start at the top of the leaderboard. Jack Devine, a forward out of Denver University, 54 points, 13 goals, 41 assists this season. Aiden Fink, we mentioned earlier, he's got 52 points this season, 23 of those coming as goals. Another guy we mentioned, Cole O'Hara, 22 goals, 51 points this season. Liam McLinsky, apologies, from Holy Cross, a smaller school, got a conference championship this weekend to potentially carry his team into the NCAA tournament. He's got 23 goals and 51 points himself. A couple of our favorite players here, Jimmy Snuggerud from the University of Minnesota, 22 goals, 49 points this season. And Arton Martino out of Clarkson University, 24 goals, 49 points, puts him at 6th in the NCAAs in points this year. And then also wanted to mention Ryan Leonard from Boston College, obviously the captain of that team, leads the NHL in goals, or leads the NCAAs in goals at 29, 47 points on the year for him. Two goalies I'll mention here, Albin Boya from Maine. He's looked really good all season. 21-7 and 6 for the Black Bears, a 9.30 save percentage, and a 1.75 goals against. You think those numbers are good?
Yeah.
Let's talk about Alex Tracy from Minnesota State Mankato. Quietly in the CCHA is 25, 8 and 3, a 9.46 save percentage, and a 1.41 goals against average. Unbelievable. Jake, talk to me about a couple of the players on this list that you are really excited to see potentially crack the top 10 here.
I mean, Alex Tracy, first and foremost, those numbers, I mean, I'm used to commentating women's college hockey, and we'll see a lot of those high save percentages, low goals against. But, I mean, I don't think I've seen that in men's college hockey in a while. A 1.41 goals against average, that is going to be tough to argue against if you're going for a goalie for Hobie Baker. But, I mean, definitely on the Mike Richter Award watch list, gotta be. For skaters, for me, Jack Devine is probably the quote unquote chalk pick if you had to make one, just because he leads the NCAA in scoring. But I mean, rightfully so. He's on a Denver team that's always good, and he's leading them in scoring. I mean, 41 assists this year. Definitely a really good playmaker. He's also a USNTDP alum, so has the national experience there. Also Florida's 7th round draft pick. So heck of a steal by the Panthers in the 7th round, 221st overall. And he's leading the NCAA in scoring. So got to feel good if you're a Panthers fan having this guy coming into the lineup potentially next year. And then got to give the hometown shout out to Ayrton Martino. I mean, Marty, he's been slowly becoming one of the best players in college hockey, and he showed it this year. And I mean, he came in as a freshman a couple years ago, was able to contribute pretty much right away, didn't really have the flashy numbers, but was able to grab ECAC Rookie of the Year. And I think he's really coming to his own and to his own identity. He was kind of struggling to find that in his sophomore, junior year, but he's really stepped up as a leader of this Clarkson team. And I really hope that he makes this top 10 just so that we can see it. I don't think we've seen a Clarkson player really in that top 10 in a while. So ECAC represent, and hopefully he gets some votes. So, but all these players really good. I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, Martino, a guy who, if anyone from the ECAC is going to crack that top 10, he really is the guy that probably deserves it. And you mentioned Devine there. Can you imagine a third line in the playoffs with Mackie Samasevich in the middle between Brad Marchand and Jack Devine? Like, that scares me.
Yeah.
In the playoffs there for the Florida Panthers. But you mentioned Alex Tracy, and I want to talk a little bit about him because, you know, his numbers are unbelievable video game-like numbers, playing in the CCHA against maybe some lower competition, but at some point you just got to look at the guy and say, he's just stopping the puck, right? 94.6% of the time the shot comes at him, it's not going in the net. And that's the main job as a goaltender. When Jordan McKay won the Hobie Baker as a goaltender a few years back from Minnesota State Mankato, his numbers 38-5-0, a 9.31 save percentage, and a 1.31 goals against. So 0.15% better on that save percentage, jumping from a 9.46 to a 9.31. A little higher goals against average, but just means more shots are coming at Tracy this season. And obviously, as he continues to play, he'll rack up more wins and potentially get one upcoming this weekend and maybe sneak one out in this NCAA tournament as well. But I think those numbers are just unbelievable to at least not get a top 10 nominee. And it wouldn't shock me given the wide open range of some of the skaters this season if he does end up cracking that top 3. And then a guy who I think just kind of based off namesake is going to make some noise is Ryan Leonard, captain of the U.S. junior team, captain of Boston College. He currently leads all of college hockey in goals, which usually makes a huge impact on their decision making. I think they really value guys who put the puck in the net. When you look at a guy like Cutter Gauthier last year, who didn't have as many points but cracked that top 3 just because of how many times he found the back of the net. But for me, Leonard's leadership and what he does for his team is kind of embodies what the Hobey Baker Award is and has been for so many years. And I think if there's any guy who embodies what college hockey is all about, it's Ryan Leonard, right? He could have easily gone and played for the Capitals last year, but he wanted to come back for his team. He wanted to come back and prove that there was more that team had to offer. And we've seen it this year. They're the number 1 team in the country. He's the best player on the best team. And I think for that reason, he's somebody that we could easily see getting that Hobey Baker this year. Looking at the women's side of the tournament, we are into the Frozen Four, and some unfortunate news for some of our Clarkson fans out here, but we will start off with some of the good news for them. Thursday, they had a 3-1 win over Boston University to set themselves up with a matchup against Wisconsin on Saturday. Also in that first round, we had Minnesota Duluth beating Sacred Heart by a score of 6-1. And St. Louis, another ECAC powerhouse there, getting a big win over Penn State by a score of 4-2. Moving on into Saturday's games, we did have a full chalk Final Four, which I think a lot of people anticipated, but a lot of fairly good hockey games. Wisconsin did end up beating Clarkson by a score of 4-1 on Saturday. Ohio State getting the best of St. Lawrence by a score of 6-1. Cornell playing a very close game against Duluth, but ultimately winning 1-0. And the Golden Gophers of Minnesota with a 3-2 victory over Colgate, setting up a couple of really awesome matchups for the Final Four. Ohio State is going to be playing against Cornell in the 2-3 matchup. And then the border battle, the battle for the axe, if you're a football fan, the Wisconsin Badgers and the Minnesota Golden Gophers facing off for a chance at the championship game. Jake, what were your overall impressions on the entire weekend as a whole from the women's side of the tournament?
I think it was definitely a really fun weekend of hockey. Obviously, as a Clarkson fan, didn't go the way I wanted, but I mean, first of all, snaps and big props to the Sacred Heart Pioneers getting their first ever NCAA tournament goal, and that program is one to watch. I will say. I mean, they've been doing a lot of things. Their new barn is absolutely beautiful. If you haven't seen it, you got to check out their behind the scenes tour. And I think they're going to attract a lot of good prospects out there. So really, really happy with how they've done. I mean, I remember Clarkson played them in an exhibition matchup a couple of years ago. And it was like when we played LIU and playing their women's team, it was just not fair. But now they're really coming into their own in the NEWHA. And I think they're going to be a perennial NCAA tournament bid for years to come. So watch out for them. I think ECAC was represented well. Clarkson, St. Lawrence, Cornell. I'm really surprised if Quinnipiac for the first time not in this NCAA tournament, which we're so used to seeing. But UMD always a tough out, and I think Cornell played them really well on Saturday. So props to the Big Red for making it again. And we knew Wisconsin was going to go far. I mean, the top 3 Patty Caz finalists on the same team. I mean, it happened before. I think it was Minnesota back in 2013, I want to say. And I mean, it's so hard. I mean, Caroline Harvey, Layla Edwards. It's so hard to go against that. And then their goaltending's fantastic. So I think Wisconsin very well deserved into the Frozen Four. Minnesota as well. A really good game against a really tough Colgate team. I mean, Kaltenkova has been the bane of my existence for so long, and Minnesota finally slams the door on Colgate. And props to Colgate, though. I mean, they've been really good program over the last couple of years, and they've been top 1-2 in the ECAC. So really kind of bummed that they didn't make it, but Minnesota well-deserved win. I think it's going to be a battle of the ages for this Frozen Four. I mean, Wisconsin, Minnesota, you couldn't dream it up any better. And then even on the other side, Ohio State, Cornell, I don't think we've seen a lot of matchups between these two teams, especially at the height of their powers. So I think that's going to be a really interesting game to watch as well. The WCHA powerhouse versus the ECAC champions. So it's gonna be. I feel like we were saying this a lot this episode, but there really is no clear winner for me. I mean, Wisconsin is the easy pick, but I could see Minnesota taking that upset with a really hard fought battle, and then going for the championship. I could see any one of these four teams making it. So, my prediction for this weekend, I think it's going to be Wisconsin over Minnesota very closely. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an overtime win. And then I'm going to take the Big Red of Cornell to upset the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think Cornell's time is due. Ohio State's been to the national championship both of the last 2 years, so I think it's time for some new blood into that matchup. And then I think it's going to be a Wisconsin national championship, which is tough to say. They knocked us out in 2022, I want to say, when we met them over at Northeastern's rink. 1-0 score. That was a tough one for Clarkson fans, but I think it's going to be Wisconsin, and it's going to be a tough matchup against Cornell.
Well, you didn't have to really disappoint me like that, telling me that you thought the Badgers were going to, even if it's close, beat the Golden Gophers there. I'm going to look into my crystal ball and root for Minnesota this upcoming weekend. But I think what I've learned is if you want to be a good women's hockey program, have red as a primary, because all four teams supporting the red, one even named the Big Red. So I feel like Sacred Heart has got themselves already in the right direction by having red as their primary. As we transition off of the college front, we head over to the NHL. Not a ton of news that we want to cover today, but just a couple of things that we saw. Bad boy Connor Bedard, back-to-back games with a 10-minute misconduct. The first one seems like he said something to the ref. I still haven't seen what exactly he said. He seems to not have any idea what he could have said, but I feel like there's a lot of strong heads. I think Chris Rooney was the ref there, a Southie, former guy from Southie, so shout out to Chris Rooney there. But I think you got to say something to an NHL ref to be getting a 10-minute misconduct there.
Yeah.
And then the next game against, I think it was St. Louis or Vancouver, I remember I could just see the blue team behind it. But basic net scrum that turns into Bedard just completely dogging somebody for no reason, gets a 10-minute, throws his helmet behind the bench, has to apologize to the equipment staff back there for knocking over some sticks. Just you can see the frustration in Bedard's game on the ice and even off the ice now with some of the penalties that he's taken. Jake, what does this Blackhawks team need to do to salvage this last month of the season and have it not spoil? Because it seems like it's just going in such a bad direction right now if you're a Chicago fan.
Yeah, and it's really tough. I mean, I empathize with Connor Bedard a lot. He's a young kid. He was picked first overall. He was promised to be this generational prospect, and we've seen flashes of it. He's such a good hockey player, but I think when you have literally the hopes and dreams of an entire franchise on your back, it's not good for someone who's that young. And I mean, they traded away Taylor Hall, who was kind of his de facto mentor on that team. They traded away Seth Jones, who, for better or for worse, was an assistant captain on that team and did hold a little bit of a leadership role. But it seems like they're taking out the supports from under him and just waiting for him to fall. And I can't understand why Chicago would do that with their first overall pick. Like, Chicago, why what are you doing? Like, I think they just need to find him someone that can share some of that load, whether it be a veteran who you can give like a 2-3 year contract just to be a bridge and a mentor, or if it's an actual bona fide superstar that you want to go out and get this offseason to kind of share that load. Obviously, Chicago's not the best free agent destination right now, but you got to do something to help him out. And I mean, the misconducts too, like, it's getting late in the season. You can't be taking those kind of penalties. Even if Chicago is completely out of the playoff race, it's just not good for the team as a whole to see the young star just take these penalties. So I think it's a tough situation all the way around in Chicago, but yeah, I just wish they would get him some help. Just please.
You think about a lot of the bona fide centers that have joined the league over the past 10 years, right? Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, even looking back on Celebrinian, all of those guys have had NHL quality players around them, right? If you think about Edmonton when McDavid joined, yeah, they were not a very good team, but they at least had guys like Nugent Hopkins and Taylor Hall and Darnell Nurse, right? Like they had guys who could competently play above average hockey and at least give that team a hope. Even the Maple Leafs, it didn't take them very long to get Mitch Marner around town, and they make a big signing for John Tavares very quickly after, and Morgan Riley was already there for a few years. So I think if you're Chicago, you really got to start to understand how this is going to impact a player's development. And besides the fact of all of this, Bedard is still putting up nearly a point per game. And you could put him with literally anybody, and he probably will put up a point per game. However, you don't want him to stall out on that because he's stuck playing with guys his entire career that just, for lack of a better term, are probably not first line NHL guys. And
Yeah.
For me, and that was the nice way to say it. I was ready to really, I was really ready to throw some shade at Tyler Bertuzzi and Timo Teravainen, but we're not going to do that today. We're not going to do that. But no, I think if you're Chicago, right, like you thought they tried to do that this offseason and it, threw something at the wall, it didn't stick. You got to try again next year. You can't continue to be super non-competitive and expect your players to develop. Look at what happened to Buffalo. It's been 12 years of them developing their prospects. They haven't developed anything as a team. And I think you're going to start to lose the leash on Bedard, and you're going to have to start to think about, is he a Blackhawk for his career if you're not able to put pieces around him to succeed? So for me, I think, at least for the rest of the season, right, like get him playing with the best players possible and get him in situations to not only succeed, but to grow as a player, right? Like get him some PK opportunities potentially, right? Like try him out in different spots in the power play, see what works, see what doesn't. Like it can be a little bit of an experiment this last month of the season.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is maybe get him out of the faceoff dot. I mean, you're going up against the 1C every single night, and I don't know if he's that good of a faceoff taker to be doing that night in and night out. Like, yes, I think he can definitely be a 1C in this league. I just think he needs a little bit more refinement in faceoffs. And I mean, you got a guy like Nick Foligno, use him. I mean, he is, for better or for worse, probably one of the better faceoff takers on that team. And I just think it's an interesting spot that they put him in because, again, he's shouldering a lot of the load. But then again, this is the guy that told Patrick Kane that he's soft after he tripped him. So, I mean, he definitely does have a little bit of edge to him. So,
yeah, I feel like you could maybe shelter those face-offs at home, right? When the road team is sending their lines out first, maybe you don't put him up against a Sidney Crosby as the 1C for Pittsburgh every time you see him. Maybe for the first opening puck drop for the NHL, the media. But the rest of the game, I think as a home game, you kind of got to try and shelter and give him better opportunities to succeed at the dot. And I think it's still important to take them just because you got to learn to do it somehow if you're going to be a 1C in the future. And I don't see Bedard as a player that he's too dynamic to put on the wing, right? Like he's not going to be able to drive the play as much on the right or left side. So for me, I think it's just giving him better matchups at home and really starting to, be strategic about how you deploy Bedard.
yeah.
Moving over to the East, the New Jersey Devils. This is not 2023-24. This is 24-25, and yet we are still talking about the injury bug being there for New Jersey. We talked last week about Jack Hughes. He will be out for the remainder of this season. And why don't we just add a couple of blue liners that are going to join that list? Dougie Hamilton out for at least the rest of the regular season, and Jonas Siegenthaler out for the remainder of the season itself. I mean, if you're New Jersey, you're still the 3 spot in the Metro. You've actually started to grow that lead since these injuries, surprisingly. But, I mean, if you're New Jersey, what are the next moves? Are you really just kind of hoping for some of the guys like a Simon Nemec to come up and Seamus Casey, who played at the beginning of the season on that right side of the defense, like to step up and hopefully give yourself a chance to fight here? Or are you kind of just throwing the towel in if you're a Devils fan?
I think you still have to fight. I mean, you're in a decent spot in that 3 spot, and you've got a couple wild card teams right on your heels. I think unless it really becomes a point of like, okay, these wildcard teams are coming up way too fast, way too quickly. I think you still have to go because I mean, you still have Jacob Markstrom in net, and you still have a guy like Luke Hughes who you want to develop on that blue line, and you do have like a Timo Meyer. I think you have enough talent to get to the playoffs. It's in the playoffs where I think they're going to really struggle if they do get there. So uh, it's tough to throw in the towel just yet this soon after the trade deadline. I mean, and this soon after all those injuries, but yeah, you're gonna you're gonna have to have these guys step up. And Utica, get ready. You're gonna have a lot of plane tickets to book from Syracuse to Newark. So I think there's gonna be a lot of different guys they're gonna try on these lines, and hopefully something sticks for them.
You mentioned Markstrom. He's absolutely the X factor here for me, right? Like if he stays healthy, and Jake Allen's been a really good backup too,
Yeah.
but you want him to be a backup there, right? Like you don't want him to have to work that load. So I think if you're New Jersey, if you can keep Markstrom healthy, I mean, going through their line chart, Timo Meyer, Nico Heischer, Stefan Mason, Eric Howland, Cody Glass, Jesper Bratt. I don't want Cody Glass as your 2C, but you're kind of stuck with it. Andre Palat, Dawson Mercer, Tomas Tatar, Paul Cotter, who I really like as a player, Curtis Lazar, and Nathan Bastion round out the fourth line. Luke Hughes, Brett Pesce on the top pair, Brian Dumoulin, Jonathan Kovacevic at the 2 spot, and Brendan Dillon and Simon Nemec called up from Utica on the 3rd spot. That's a playoff roster, right? Like I still think they put themselves in a good position at the deadline. You know, you pick up Dumoulin, you add some more depth around this team, and Cody Glass, who's now playing a little bit higher in the line than he should, but still, you're picking up some depth there. You're going to get a Carolina matchup in the first round, and they've been red hot recently, but still, like another team that we question their depth and what their roster looks like post Mikko Rantanen trade. And then you get either the Capitals, who again we've always been questioned about. I think the Metro is just one of those spots this year where like I wouldn't count New Jersey out yet, especially if Markstrom can get hot. Like this is a roster that you could have a goaltender carry to a conference final. Like especially one with as high of a caliber as Jacob Markstrom and what we've seen at his peak, right? Like when Calgary was making those runs in the playoffs and I think ultimately lost most of those to Edmonton back in 22 and 23, like Markstrom was really the only reason they were still there. And with the injuries that were to Calgary those 2 seasons. So I feel like if you get yourself into the chance, like anything's possible. You get a puck bounce here and there, and all of a sudden you find yourself in round 2, and then you get another puck bounce and you're in the conference finals. And from there it's can they stay healthy? Probably not. It's the New Jersey Devils, but I wouldn't want to count them out quite yet. And they've played pretty good since these injuries. So we'll see if they can continue to keep it up. But another player who's played really good recently, let's talk about Tristan Jarry. Wanted to give him a quick shout here. He's back from the AHL. He was out in Wilkes-Barre for probably 3-4 months at this point. I feel like we hadn't heard Tristan Jarry noise in quite some time. 4-0-0 with a .930 save percentage since returning from the AHL. And the Penguins are, again, one of those bubble teams that I personally liked out of all of them just because of the fact that they had Sidney Crosby. But now you're getting really solid goaltending out of Tristan Jarry, who you paid to be that starting goaltender. And Jake, if he's continuing to play at probably not a .930 level, but if he continues to get Pittsburgh really solid goaltending on that back end, and Nedeljkovic is starting to play a little better as well, like, do you really think the Penguins have a shot at this last wild card here?
I don't know. And I think they traded away a lot of their depth pieces at the deadline. Someone like an Anthony Beauvillier, who's a really good penalty killer, they traded him away. And their top 6 is looking okay, but their bottom 6 is looking a little thin to me in their forward core. And then like with the defensive pairings as well, Ryan Graves broke his pointless streak last week. I think we shouted it out, but he officially has a point through the last 40 games, which is kind of insane after the amount of stuff you gave up to get him. But I mean, running down their lines right now, you got Raquel, Crosby, and Russ as your bona fide first line. Second line, you got Heinen, Malkin, Tomasino. Then third line, you get Connor Dewar, Blake Lizotte, and Nola Chari. And then fourth line, you get Boko Omama, which I think I saw. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw him play in Cleveland a little bit ago. And then Kevin Hayes and Emil Bemstrom. So that fourth line to me is, I can't believe that's a fourth line in the NHL, but And then D pairings, you got Kolyachonok and Chris Letang up top. You got Grizzlick and Carlson at the second, and then Graves and Timmins as the third D pair. And then, of course, you got Jari and Nedeljkovic in there. P.O. Joseph is out, as well as Tommy Novak with injuries, so maybe they'll be able to come back soon. But I don't know if there's enough depth for this Pittsburgh team to go. I mean, if you're already running Crosby and Malkin as much as you possibly can. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're on as much power play time as you can get them. And Raquel's looked really good. There was some talk about moving him at the deadline, but they ended up keeping him put. I think they were saying Dubas was looking for 2 first-rounders and a prospect for Ricard Raquel, which I was like, that's a little high, but
30 goals.
Yeah, I guess so. I just worry about the depth of the Penguins team. So I think anything's possible when you have Sidney Crosby on your team, as we've seen in years past. But with the Metro being as top heavy as it is, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they sneak in. But I think it's going to be a really tough task for them to get into that wild card 2 spot.
If you had told me 3 years ago that Boko Amama and Kevin Hayes would be sharing a line in 2025, I would have laughed in your face. That's absolutely insane. We are a week past the NHL trade deadline, just over in about 10 days now, as we're here on March 17th. And one thing we didn't do when we reflected that I saw on Twitter that I wanted to get your thoughts on here, the all trade deadline team. So these are all players who were traded within a week of the NHL trade deadline. Wanted to make sure we got Seth Jones in there because we needed some help on the right side of our defense here. Well, let me run you through these lines and let me know what you think of this team. So we've got Brad Marchand, Dylan Cousins, Mikko Rantanen on that top line, Brock Nelson, Josh Norris, and Fabian Zetterlund on the second line, Gus Nyquist, Scott Lawton, and Oliver Bjorkstrand on the third line, Trent Frederick, Yanni Gord, and Charlie Coyle on the fourth, with Logan Stankoven being that 13th forward, Jake Wallman and Brendan Carlo at that top D spot. What's probably the worst defenseman pairing in the NHL of Ryan Lindgren and Seth Jones on the 2 spot there. I think, Lindgren's had some good days, but the former Gopher, and we've also seen the bad days. And then Carson Soucy and Jacob Bernard-Docker on that bottom pair, with Brian Dumoulin rounding out the 7th defense spot. Got 3 goalies here, 2 of which are involved in Florida Panthers trades. Their current backup goalie, Vitek Vanacek, and their former backup goalie, Spencer Knight. And then Vezina caliber goaltender Peter Mrazek, who we're going to round out the roster with. Jake, how deep does that playoff team go? Because I do think they're a playoff roster for sure, and they've got plenty of players if they get hurt, because there's a ton of other guys we didn't mention that got moved. But where do you see that team in terms of how crazy of a deadline it was this past year?
I think, honestly, that's a second round team for me. It'll get past the first round into the second, maybe go down to a pretty good second round team. But I mean, it was all in all a pretty crazy deadline. I mean, it wasn't like blockbuster after blockbuster after blockbuster. I mean, obviously the Rantanen situation was probably the headline situation for the entire deadline, but I mean, Brad Marchand going to Florida, who would have thought that? If someone told me that last year, I would have thought you were absolutely insane. And then Dylan Cousins, Josh Norris, just swapping spots in Buffalo and Ottawa. I mean, that's a really interesting trade that I'm really interested to see how that pans out. And then guys like Brock Nelson and Fabian Zetterlund, they're really good wingers, really good forwards to have. And then guys like a Frederick, a Coyle, even a Scott Lawton, older guys that can take a draw and kind of be that 200-foot forward that you want. And then on the D side, Jake Wallman, Brendan Carlo, that's a bona fide top D pairing right there. So I think this whole deadline in totality, I think it was pretty crazy. I think the only thing that would have made it crazier is if we saw another bona fide top 10 player in the league, like a Mikko Rantanen, switch places with Rantanen.
Yeah, I think there were rumors on the Mitch Marner side, but we did see a future Hall of Famer and Shea Weber get moved. So I feel like we did have quite a wild deadline here in 2025.
Oh, why didn't you put him in there, man? He would have had that nasty shot. Yeah.
And the leader of the team, we just park his injured body at the top of the power play and just have him hold the stick up like he's a beer league guy cherry picking on the offside blue line. So Before we wrap it up here, just some NHL award talk. So I think a lot of what we talked about earlier, where it was a wide open race, I feel like a lot of these NHL awards are really starting to narrow down. Looking at the Hart, it seems to be a three-man race at this point, according to some of the DraftKings odds that I've pulled in here as of yesterday. Connor Hellebuck, best goaltender in the league. He's been unbelievable this year. NCAA-like numbers in the NHL. 39, 9, and 3, which, by the way, that's a ton of volume so far this season. A 927 save percentage and a 197 goals against average in those games. He is not the favorite, though. He's at plus 135 because of the season that Leon Draisaitl has had. In a contract year where he gets extended for 14 mil a year coming up, he's showing why he's absolutely worth that. 49 goals, 100 points in 66 games so far this season. Sitting at a plus 29. He is minus 165, current Hart odds favorite. And then I did want to throw in the actual points leader in the NHL so far, and Nathan MacKinnon. He's at plus 650, but 27 goals, 75 assists, which is insane. And 102 points in 67 games with a plus 26 for the Colorado Avalanche. Jake, out of those three, who do you think ends up taking that top spot and winning the Hart this season?
Man, my heart is saying Nathan MacKinnon, but my head is saying Leon Draisaitl. And McKinnon has put in an absolute shift for the Avs, and that's no exaggeration. Like 75 assists, that's like the ending total of assists for the top defenseman in the league. And he's doing that after the trade deadline as a forward. And I really like what I saw out of his game this entire season. And I think when we started talking about the Pacific Division earlier in the year, it was you have Nathan MacKinnon, you have Cale Makar, the Avs are good to go. And he's showing why. I mean, MacKinnon on his own is just doing amazingly. And then you add in one of the top four defensemen in the league in Cale Makar on his blue line. And that's probably where a lot of these assists are going. So I think Draisaitl, though, I think with the evenness of the points and then the 49 goals, about to crack the 50 goal mark, I think that's probably going to be where the NHL kind of goes with the Hart.
I feel like when you're that high up in the Rocket contention, you have more assists and you have goals, you're usually going to put yourself in a really good spot there. And nobody's saying Connor McDavid's been playing bad this year, but he's not been at the level that these would be McDavid numbers that we would expect at this point in the season, and it's coming from Draisaitl in a year where they just signed him to a big deal. So I agree with you there. I think, Hellebuck, by all means, has really carried that Winnipeg team, and I think if they end up getting the President's Trophy, there could be some more talk about Connor Hellebuck, and maybe he gets an extra shutout or two coming towards the down stretch here. But for me, I think the favorite there in Draisaitl is more likely going to take the spot. Moving over to the Norris, a guy you talked about in depth was Cale Makar. He is the top favorite for the Norris at minus 175, and rightfully so. 75 points, which, by the way, same number of assists that Nathan MacKinnon has. Cale Makar has points. And top four defenseman in the league? No, he's the best defenseman in the league by far. But 24 goals, 51 points, 75 points, 51 assists this season in 67 games. Currently sits at a plus 23. The only other guy in real contention is probably Zach Werenski. Currently sits at plus 140 odds via DraftKings. 20 goals, 49 assists, and 69 points in 65 games this year with a plus 10. Jake, do you think the Ohio boy is able to sneak in a potential Norris steal here? Or do you think it's the chalk pick and Makar?
I think it's going to be Makar, but hey, don't be dissing Werenski like that. He's a Michigan boy through and through. He's Michigan Wolverine there, but no, Werenski, I mean, he's definitely carried the Blue Jackets on the blue line, but he's just not in the same league as Cale Makar, even though they are both in the NHL. I think it's a really, really good season from Cale Makar, and I am sorry, I did misspeak. I was only saying top four as in like actual like top four defensemen, but yeah, no, I mean Cale Makar, he is by far and away probably the most elite defender I've seen in my lifetime at the NHL level. I mean, there's a couple more you could throw in there in all time, but I think he's definitely going to have a fair amount of first place votes for the Norris Trophy. But I mean, hey, don't count out Werenski. Blue Jackets definitely fighting for a playoff spot, so he could be kicking into overdrive as we speak. I mean, they did just take a 2-1 loss to the Devils as as we record here. Timo Meyer, Jake Allen, 45 saves. Timo Meyer,
Jeez.
Timo Meyer with a goal, and
Timo
Jake,
time.
my boy from the Monsters, Jet Greaves, getting the start and 18 saves in the loss. So a little tough there, but yeah, I think Werenski's got a good shot, but I think Makar, as long as he doesn't get injured and as long as he, knock on wood, doesn't kind of fall off a cliff in terms of points production, I think he's got this pretty well locked up.
I wonder if Werenski would. I would assume he would probably take his talents as a Michigan boy as opposed to calling himself an Ohio boy. But he's been the face of that Blue Jackets blue line for such a long time now, and I think if they sneak into the playoffs here, like a lot of that is going to have to do with Werenski. So
Yeah.
my heart's telling me that it's kind of the Mike Trout pick, right? Like Mike
Yeah.
Trout didn't win MVP every year because his name was Mike Trout and they gave it to him last year. McCarr could win a Norris every single year if he wanted to, right? And I feel like there's a chance that the committee decides to give it to a guy like Werenski, who's really carried a team that nobody had expectations for, and they're still fighting for a playoff spot on St. Patrick's Day, which if you had told me that at the end of the season, I would have laughed at you. So I think there's still a shot there for Werenski, but obviously McCarr is the current favorite. Heading on over to the Calder, I'm going to let you speak on this because I think all of the viewers know exactly where my head's at. There's two guys right now. The favorite at minus 190 is Macklin Celebrini, 21 goals, 29 assists for 50 points in 56 games this year. And then Lane Hudson at plus 220 has 4 goals, 48 assists for 52 points from the blue line in just 66 games played for Montreal. Jake, trying to convince me that Lane Hudson has a shot at this call there. Or do you think it's wrapped up and I can celebrate my Calder Brini for this year?
I think Hudson does have a shot at this just because of the point production. But again, you look at the games played to points, it's not exactly the same. I mean, Celebrini's a lot closer to a point per game than Hudson is. But then again, Hudson's doing it on the blue line, whereas Celebrini is on that forward core and has a couple of good NHL caliber players around him. But I mean, Celebrini, again, he's a talent we haven't seen in a while. I hesitate to compare him to like a Connor McDavid or a Connor Bedard, but I think he's definitely trending in the right direction. And I can see I can see your stare right through me, Maddie.
I'm bad. I'm through your eyes, past him at this point.
But no, I mean Celebrini, he is an absolute worldie of a player, and I'd love if the Ducks had the first pick. I'm still salty about that, by the way. And I think he's definitely got the best shot here. Lane Hudson in Montreal. I mean, I think they found their blue liner of the future, and he, as long as he can keep up that assist production, I think he's definitely going to be a really good defenseman for years to come. So, I mean, both of these guys are going to bring a lot of value to their respective franchises, but I think Celebrini is going to bring the most value to the Sharks rather than if the Sharks had Lane Hudson. So I think with Celebrini and Smith on either 1C, 2C, or if you throw Smith on the wing, I think that's a bona fide first line next year, and I don't think anybody's going to bat an eye. So,
yeah, it is paining me to not go on this long tangent about how I am, and I have been for a while, Celebrini over Bedard, and I know situations play a part in that, and I'm not going to do that rant now, but it will happen multiple times between now and the end of this year. It's more than likely going to happen. I will say, if there was a stat for head fakes behind his own goal, I think Lane Hudson has this thing locked up. But plenty of songs coming out of Lane Hudson this season. But rightfully so, he's got 48 assists. Leads all rookies in assists. Leads all assists. Oh, rookies in points, I believe, as well at 52 there, coming from the blue line, which is a very impressive feature. And my favorite award that I like to track every year, and I think Mike Commodore over on Twitter does a great job at tracking this. It's getting to April, right? Everyone thinks about the Masters. My dad's actually going this year, so shout out Mark Leonardo. He'll be getting the VIP experience at the Masters this year. I'm hoping to get some.
Make sure to get that, and make sure to get that $2 hot dog too.
Oh yeah, the pimento sandwiches. I'm setting the over under for him at 8.5 this weekend. That weekend for a 2-day tournament, but $1.50 for a pimento cheese sandwich. That there's going to be plenty consumed by Mark that weekend, but. When I talk about the Masters, I talk about plus minus in the NHL. And my Commodore tracks the worst plus minuses in the league throughout the season to see who, in fact, wins the NHL Masters Award. And wanted to give a quick update here on the top guys and who I think are pretty much left in contention coming into Championship Sunday. Tiger's wearing his red, and so is Tyler Bertuzzi. He is on the top of the board at minus 34 with his teammate Connor Bedard at minus 33. No wonder all the frustration there. Barclay Goodrow comes in at minus 32, which is insane given how sheltered of minutes he plays in the NHL. A little bit of a drop off here, but still guys that are a few birdies away from getting themselves in contention here. Philip Kurashev and Kirby Dach, former teammates, now not on the same team, but both with a minus 29 this season. Macklin Celebrini does find himself at minus 27, but if you're on the Sharks and you play 20 minutes a night, surprised it's not minus 50. Roman Josi, a guy who we rarely see at the bottom of this list on a very bad national team and playing upwards of 25, 26 minutes a night. He is at minus 26. A couple of Americans, Mason Lohrei and Brock Besser, defenseman for the Bruins and winger for the Vancouver Canucks, respectively, at minus 25. And then our only guy who has switched teams throughout this Masters tournament, Luke Cunnin at minus 24, now a member of the Blue Jackets. So hopefully that'll help him get a couple bogeys on his card and get him out of the race here. And then Rasmus Anderson rounding out at minus 24. Jake, as we go into Championship Sunday, Tiger's got his red on. I know he is going to try and make a push. Unfortunately, the Achilles injury will more than likely keep him out of the actual Masters. But in terms of the NHL Masters, who do you like as your favorite here to take home the green jacket?
Ooh, honestly, with the way Nashville's been playing, I'm kind of up for a little sneaky Roman Josi there. And I really hope it doesn't happen because I love Roman Josi and I think he's a really good player. But I mean, that goaltending situation in Nashville, Matty, the Sharks are celebrating that they got Askarov out of that situation. But yeah, I think that's going to be my sneaky pick. Also, a quick update. Brock Besser jumps Mason Lohrei from when you put this together. He's got a minus 26 now.
Wow.
And Rasmus Anderson and Luke Kunin also tied, I think you said at minus 24, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like Gus Nyquist hot on their heels at minus 23. So
Another guy who jumped teams here. I feel like Minnesota, they've been in a whirlwind of bad hockey, and I know we didn't have time to talk about it today. So all of my Minnesota friends that are listening don't get to hear me rant about how bad they've been. But you mentioned Romeo Josi. I think it's a good point because I think volume does play a factor in this, right?
yeah.
They're gonna play more holes, right? They're gonna have more opportunities to be on the ice and get a minus, and that's why I feel like Bedard might take over Bertuzzi here. I think throughout the rest of the season, I mean, unless he keeps taking 10-minute misconducts, he'll be playing upwards of 20, 21 minutes a night coming towards the end of the season here. And he's one shot back of his teammate Bertuzzi, but as long as they're not playing on the same line together, which knowing the Blackhawks, they probably are, I feel like they're going to be neck and neck towards the finish line here as that season continues to kind of spiral. I'd put Goudreau up there based on the team he's playing for, but I think the number of holes he has left to play, I think he's probably got like 6 or 7 more holes left in his season, quote unquote. So I feel like he's kind of got an advantage there where he can kind of coast to a couple pars at the end here. But more than likely, I feel like we're going to see Bedard as our Masters champion here and taking home a green jacket, which I think would be the second year. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that would be the second year that we had a Chicago Blackhawk take home the green jacket.
And it would be the consecutive for Connor Bedard. It was Bedard and Kurashev last year.
Wow, look at that. So we're back-to-back champions. I would love to do some research on when the last time we saw a back-to-back Masters champion in the NHL was, but the face of the franchise, Connor Bedard, if anyone's going to do it, we said he's a young phenom, and look at him winning green jackets in his rookie and sophomore season.
I don't know if he's going to have as bad of a season as he did last year. He was minus 77.
I mean, that's generational numbers. That's like that's like 2002 Tiger when he won it by like 10 strokes, or it was 97 maybe. It was the year when Tiger won the Masters by about 10 strokes.
It
and
is
then-
funny seeing like the repeat names on here. I mean, you got Luke Kunin as well. Your boy Willie Eklund is on this one, as well as Nick Foligno. Barkley Goodrow again finding his way on this with 13-11 of ice time. Somehow he's still dash 45. I don't know how that happened, but
Hey man, when you get a lot of eagles and albatrosses,
oh
I feel
wait,
like,
hold on. Hold on. We have to recalculate. I am so sorry. NHL stats has it. You can sum the results. So over the last 2 seasons, Connor Bedard is a minus 77. I was
so he
about
had
to say
44
that,
dash last year. That's
so it
still
was
really
your
bad.
boy. It was your boy Willie Eklund with a dash 45 last year.
Lovely.
So Bedard was right behind him as a dash 44. He was tied with Philip Zadina and Philip Kurashev. 2 different ways to spell Philip. So.
Well, we started our conversation with his brother Victor Eklund during the prospects. We went through a whole whirlwind of hockey topics today and ended with William Eklund as our previous Masters champion. I wonder what he probably goes Swedish meatballs for his Masters dinner before having to hand
I
that
don't know.
over, right?
But I saw your game, and I'm kind of springing this on you, but I wanted to introduce one of my own, and it's the Civ Award. And it's the goalies with the most goals allowed, and I want to see if you can guess the top 3 here.
Or are we qualified, or is it pretty much just
yeah, they're qualified. All of them are qualified. They all have exactly 49 games played, so
oh jeez. I
they're all
mean,
starters in their
I
own
would
right.
I would have to guess Georgiev. I mean, even in Colorado, he was giving up 9 per, and then in San Jose,
Yeah,
he did
so
pretty
he's
much the
tied
same.
for 4th there
Jeez.
with Elvis Merzlikins. Those are
Okay.
the first 2 off.
Lovely. Alrighty. I mean, is our Vezina guy Mrazek on the list for Detroit? I mean, I feel like he was bad in Chicago.
He's
this
actually
year.
kind of down. Well, think of goals against more of like how many goals they let in versus the actual percentages. So this is more.
Oh, this is just total. This is just guys
Yeah.
letting pucks in the net.
Yeah.
See, this
So
is an
you got 2
interesting
east.
stat.
You got 2 east and 1 west.
This is an interesting one because not only do you have to like be good enough to keep giving the opportunity to play goaltender, but you also have to be bad enough to keep letting pucks into the net.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so I mean, I think Buffalo, maybe like an Ukko-Pekka Lehkonen might be.
That's
up
our
on
number
there.
1. He's got 149 goals allowed this season with an .888 save percentage.
A great draft pick from George Bannister in the fantasy hockey draft. I think he took him over Jake Ottinger, which
I'm
lovely
pretty sure
pick.
he found his way onto a roster for championship week coming up.
That's insane. I mean, that's pretty wild. UC Saros maybe out of the West.
Yep.
I feel like he's been good, but like I have him in fantasy and he's not been that good.
He's number 3 with 138 goals allowed this season with an .898, but he's got a .292 goals against average. So
And he plays a lot. He's a volume shooter. He keep getting pucks at your face, and they're gonna fall in at some point.
Yep.
All right. Who's also bad in the East? I mean, Buffalo is really that one team that's tough. I mean, maybe Sorokin. Like he's been.
No.
the
So
Islanders
this
been
one,
bad.
I'll give you a little. It was one of the 2 East goalies that was extended this year.
Like prior to the season.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Who? Because Jari got extended, but he's been the entire season in the A. Some good trivia towards the end of this episode here. Who sucks at goaltending? I know I did when I played floor hockey back in the day, but I'm trying to think of who else would be a tough in there. It's not Merzlikins. What do you got for me? Let's hear it.
It's an Atlantic goalie.
Jeez. Okay. I mean, it's not. Is it Montembeault?
No, but it is original 6.
Oh, geez. Cam Talbot potentially in Detroit? Or Alex Lyon in Detroit? Is it Linus Hallmark?
You're getting warmer. Who was his partner?
Wow, the Bruins have been that. We gotta end on that. You can't crap on Jeremy Swayman like that. What a great! Did you watch the NHL face-off thing? Like he's such a great guy.
I know, and that's why.
That.
That's why it surprised me so much because I thought Georgiev would be so far into this. But Jeremy Swayman, 143 goals allowed this season and .897 save percentage. But he's 20 and 23, whereas the others, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is 22 and 21, and Jussi Saros is 16 and 26 in terms of record. So It's interesting to see because Boston has been on the upswing recently. So those numbers have definitely been getting better. So I would have been interested to see like what this was, say, like a couple months ago when they were near the bottom of the Atlantic. So it's it's a really interesting thing, and it really makes you think about like goaltenders in high leverage situations are so much more valuable because I'd so much rather have a Jeremy Swayman in the net than someone right below him in Elvis Merzlikins.
Yeah, and I think if you think about a lot of these teams that are in the playoffs, how many of them would grab on a Jeremy Swayman right now, given how dominant he was in the playoffs, quite literally just a year ago? So, put me to sleep in my sorrows having to hear that a fan favorite in Jeremy Swayman has had a rough season. It's been a rough one for the Bruins, but I think a lot of Boston fans out here are hoping for a retool. Jake, what do you got planned for this week? A lot of sports coming at you here. It's the best sports month of the year, in my opinion. You got March Madness starting up on Thursday. Any sleeper upset picks in your bracket, and who do you think is going to win the whole thing?
Sleeper upset pick for me. Watch out for the Akron Zips, baby. I got to see him in person at the MAC tournament this last weekend, and they're the real deal. They blew out Bowling Green in the semifinal. That was the quarterfinal. That's the game I went to, and it was a fun day of quarterfinal action at the MAC. But I think Akron's a good shout, and then it's actually coming to Cleveland. First round, second round games are going to be there. And I think the Bryant Bulldogs and the Michigan State Spartans are going to be here. And then I think it's St. Mary's and VCU are the two games. So I think that'll be an interesting one. If Bryant can go, I knew a couple people that went to Bryant. That would be a really fun upset to watch. But my pick to win it all already, St. John's Red Storm, baby. They're back. Big East supremacy is back. I missed Syracuse in the Big East, but
I was ready to be the only one that was back in Rick Pitino and the boys, but I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one here. I think the Big East has always been undervalued in the tournament. They always go and make a deep run. Creighton, they had that Elite Eight run. UConn's won the last two national championships. Villanova had their run, and even before, when they were the legit Big East, right? You think about all those fun Syracuse teams that made big runs and stuff like that. But I do agree with you. I think St. John's is a team that goes pretty deep in this tournament. I think they play a pretty good tournament style basketball, and yes, a team could get hot and knock them out because they're not the best shooters. But I think if you're rooting for a team to make shots as opposed to rooting for a team that can play a good game without having to make shots, I think it's a more stable game there. And another team that plays very similarly to them, who I do have as my national championship, and a little bit of bias, obviously, but GBO, Rocky Top, Tennessee this year. I think they've got a few players who are huge game changers. Zakai Ziegler has looked really good this year. Chaz Lanier, the transfer, has made a ton of shots, and Jamal Meshack has looked really solid on defense. Again, similar to St. John's, not the best shooting team, but they're going to stay in the game because of that prolific defense that they play. So I've got the Volunteers winning it this year over St. John's, and I think for an upset pick, a lot of people are liking the UC San Diego team. I kind of agree there. I have them in my Sweet 16, but in the 8 line, Gonzaga is a very solid team. They're very well coached. I think they were very underseeded. I think they could easily be a 6 or a 5, and they got put into the 8 spot. And they're playing a Houston team who always seems to kind of falter around this time, in my opinion. So I feel like if you see Gonzaga kind of make a run at it, I wouldn't be shocked if they end up facing Tennessee in the Elite Eight. That's kind of my one big sleeper pick of a team that kind of makes a deep push here. But any other plans for this weekend for you, Jake?
Just to watch Clarkson hopefully beat Dartmouth in the semifinal round, and hopefully they get that ECAC chip, first one since 2019. Other than that, got to be learning how to rappel, actually, for my big outdoor climbing trip coming up in April. So hopefully that goes well and you won't see me in a boot or a cast. So prayers up for me, but I think it'll be fine. We're only going like 10 feet up in the air, so hopefully it won't be that bad.
Well, if I could survive skiing, I think you can survive climbing, especially as a veteran in the climbing game yourself. But whether you're rooting from New York, Boston, or even Italy, there'll be a lot of people tuning into the Clarkson Golden Knights this weekend, and we wish them the best of luck as a Clarkson Stan podcast here, and especially rooting for the women's side, the Minnesota Golden Gophers on my end. Row the boat, Sky Uman, go Gophers. Thank you guys for all tuning in to episode 27 of the Fifth Liners podcast. Next week, we will give the keys back to our main driver, Casey Ditzel, and we will talk about how the NCAA landscape has turned out with some of the conference championships and some of the women's games, as well as getting super close to that NHL playoff time, which we are super desperate to get to. Thank you all for listening, and we'll have yourselves a great night.